Good morning Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Magandang umaga sa lahat ng ating mga listeners. Ito na ang bago niyong pakakaabangan tuwing Sabado ng umaga kung saan ay makakuha tayo ng bagong kaalaman sa siyensya. Ito ang Radyo Bantay Agham, makabagong pamamaraan sa pagsulong ng agham. Ako ang inyong lingkod, Mira Bringas, at maaari din kayong tumutok through our FB and YouTube live streams. So follow our FB page and YouTube channel, Radyo Bantay Agham. At mamaya lamang, we will get some questions from our listeners' comments through our social media page. We all know that science is a systematic enterprise that may be hard to explain because of its complex scientific methods and ideas that only a scientific community can understand. So today, I'm very excited to introduce our guest because we will talk about how science can be communicated in a lighter context para mas madaling maunawaan ng non-scientists like us at ng publiko. So I'm very privileged to have our program guest for today. She is a visual communication specialist from Project Mappable. It's a project under Department of Science and Technology, Philippine Council for Industry Energy, and Emerging Technology, Research and Development, or DOST, PSHERT. And I'm sure she will bring fun and light to science. Good morning, Miss Ella.
Good morning, Miss Mira.
Hello,
Good
how are
morning,
you?
everyone. I'm doing well, thank you.
And thank you so much, Miss Ella, for gracing our show because this is our pilot episode and our listeners are very excited right now. So, Miss Ella, could you please share with us your background and how is it working with DOSTP shirt?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ella, and I'm a development communicator. I took my undergraduate degree in development communication from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. I think it's safe to say that even during my undergraduate years, I have been exposed to development work because our curriculum encourages praxis or the mix of theory and practice. After graduating from the university, I was given the chance to work with various non governmental organizations with different advocacies. So, there I experienced creating communication materials for different kinds of advocacies or subject matters, from social welfare to sustainability related projects. Right now, like Miss Mira mentioned, I work as a visual communication specialist for Project Mappable. And for this project, I work with researchers who are adept in making use of geospatial technologies and field research. Later, we can talk about what geospatial technologies are. And our team is mostly composed of geodetic engineers and foresters, and I am the main point person for all the science communication activities of the project.
Oh, what an amazing role, Miss Ella. And I actually like how you're working with researchers. You said you're also working with scientists, foresters, and engineers. And I'm sure that we will learn a lot from your experiences as a development communicator. So, right now in your job, what can you say is the main challenge in understanding science and also in communicating science?
That's a good question, Miss Mira. Actually, there is a lot of challenge in learning science. I mean, uh, just learning science is hard, especially when you are not an expert on the subject matter. I think this is also one of the reasons why our curriculum back in my undergraduate years required us to take 6 technical electives. That's a lot of electives compared to other degrees. But regardless of how many technical electives that we enrolled to in college, once you're in the arena with actual scientists and experts, it can be nerve wracking, can be scary and intimidating. But the beauty about not knowing or simply not being a scientist is you get to have your audience's perspective. So, with enough engagement and conversations with your scientific peers, so our engineers, for example, you get a picture of how you can communicate the subject to non experts as well. And what I also find rewarding here is that the scientists who I work with get to also learn from me because likewise, it's a challenge for them to explain jargons and scientific concepts to me. So it takes a really long conversation before uh, they can communicate what they're doing, their research outputs to me. And they also get to appreciate the work that I do. So, for example, so most of them have heard of development communication for the first time when I joined the team. And of course, they also become more mindful. And I think this is the most important one. They become more mindful of how they talk to their stakeholders and the other people who are exposed to their work. So yeah, that's the challenge, and at the same time, the beauty of understanding and learning science.
That's great. It sounds like a win win approach for you and the scientists that you're working with. You guys are actually learning from each other. Ella, I'm also curious about Project Mappable. Is this already available on social media? Maybe our audience might get interested about it.
So Project Mappable is also available on Facebook. So you can look it up. Facebook.com/Project Mappable. It's spelled as Mappable is spelled as Mapable. And it's a one of the projects under the I Am for Manila Bay program. So Project Mappable stands for the development. It's not really the name it is. The abbreviation is different from from the meaning of the of Mapable. So the development of integrated mapping, monitoring, and analytical network system for Manila Bay and linked environments. So it's one of the four component projects of the integrated mapping, modeling, and management system for Manila Bay and link system. So it's the bigger program. It's a Mapable is a 2-year research undertaking. It's supported, yes, like you mentioned, by DOST and managed by the Philippine Council for Industry, Energy, and Emerging Technology Research and Development, or PSHARED. The Mappable aims to develop and deploy an integrated system for mapping and monitoring the water quality of Manila Bay and link system. So, I think we all know that Manila Bay is at risk because of its declining water quality and environment. So, our goal is to provide a monitoring system using satellite imaging and other geospatial technologies and citizen science as well. So this does not only include Manila Bay but also its tributary rivers and river systems. So it's implemented by the University of the Philippines Training Center for Applied Geodesy and Photogrammetry, or UPCAGP, from the UP College of Engineering in UP Diliman.
Great! I'm sure that Project Mappable will be a great research contribution to provide solutions to the ongoing environmental issues, not just dito sa Manila Bay, but also sa buong bansa. Pero I'm just curious, Miss Ella, about how your team is working and communicating all these with other government agencies and let's say sa Manila LGUs. And ano rin yung mga challenges that your team is facing right now while doing the project?
First of all, we are connected to the government. Well, in terms of being housed in UP and at the same time being funded by the OST. So that's a start. But um, there are a lot of challenges when it comes to working with other agencies, other government agencies, because of them of our very unique bureaucratic system. But if we're going to tone down the conversation to something more relatable to our listeners, I think for today our biggest challenge is fake news. So even in science, there are fake news. Um, but I believe that science in general, not just science communication, faces challenges when it comes to transforming research outputs to policies. So fake news hinder science science research outputs from being transformed into policies. Sad to say that even in this field, there is politics. But then again, the role of science communication, our role is to mitigate these gaps. So when we are all knowledgeable about how science affects our lives, we become more conscious, and this knowledge helps us shape our decisions. So, just to give you a very simple example, uh, say if we are able to communicate how plastic waste from homes end up in the oceans through plastic mapping. So we do that in our project. It's one of our outputs. And or showing how hydrology is able to track plastic waste from households to the oceans. This is another project, research output by another project under the I Am from Manila Bay program, Project eSmart. People become more conscious about using plastic. So if we tell them that, hey, your single-use plastic, your plastic spoon, that can reach the ocean just by simple uh, simulations or map references. Regardless if there is an existing policy on plastic use or not, whenever they encounter plastic utensils, they will think twice before using them. So I think twice before using single-use plastic because I learned from our engineers. But then again, the challenge is still this to make policymakers recognize these findings on different environmental issues. That would be bet that would be better because they can act on them by actually passing legislation to stop, say, the use of single plastics in their localities, or better in the whole country. So um, if we are able to communicate the right information, not fake scientific information to our policymakers, that could really change a lot
Yeah.
about our, especially for environment.
So, Miss Ella, as a development and science communicator, you have the voice to inform and communicate these facts, not just to people, but also to the policymakers in the country.
Yes, yes, Miss Mira, that's right.
All right. So, how do you communicate the science behind these issues? Like yung nabanggit mo about the environmental issue ng single-use plastic. So, how do we communicate these
Mm,
things to
so
the general public?
so there are many ways to communicate science to the public. But of course, we start with knowing our audience. So it's not always the general public, but sometimes we really do have target audiences. In science communication, I have realized that we have two sets of audiences. One is the target audience of the scientists or the experts. So these are the audience that they indicated in their research outlines. But the other is the scientists themselves. So I mentioned a while ago how they learn from science communicators like me when it comes to simplifying or laymanizing, popularizing their research outputs to the public. And then after we identify our audience, we should be able to determine the medium that we will use to communicate this scientific knowledge. So we have social media, we have print, we have webinars, we have face-to-face gatherings, although that is a bit limited these days, and other equipping activities. So for example, we communicate with staff from different local government units. So these staff members are quite knowledgeable in geospatial technologies, but they need more equipping. So that's what we provide them. So that's also a science communication activity. So but for the more general public, social media and print media are the best media that we can use. But also, today we have emerging methods in science communication. One of our project objectives is actually to use citizen science as a method. So with citizen science, we invite the public participate in scientific research by making space for them to volunteer and answer real-life science questions. So for our project, we have Masdan. Masdan is a citizen science app that uh, citizens can use to report environmental issues in water bodies near them. So for example, in the
Sorry, Miss
rivers.
Ella. Gusto ko lang i-highlight yung app na sinasabi mo. And this is also for our
Yes.
listeners. So the name of the app is Masdan, like the Tagalog word Masdan.
Yes, pagmamasid. So, Masdan. So, yeah, Masdan is a GIS web application that we developed. So, you can access it or you can download it on Google Play. Just type in Masdan. And once you sign up, you can take photos of environmental issues in your community. For example, are there solid waste in your river or in your creeks or in your esteros? You can take a photo of those issues and then send it via the app. So once you send it using the app, authorities, like say for example, local environmental task force in your cities can act on these issues. But then again, it's still in beta mode because we are looking for partners within LGUs pa to use the monitoring interface so that the monitoring interface is exclusive to LGUs naman. So that's another challenge. So I mentioned a while ago about policy making. That's another challenge because um, there is so much politics even in jurisdictions or in water bodies that when you try to when you make a report say on this part of the river, local government units have a hard time distinguishing their jurisdictions and their roles actually in protecting the environment. So that's a bit hard on their part. But the application can already be used by citizens like you or like our listeners. If you're interested, you can just download the app via Google Play.
Okay, so maybe we can invite our listeners right now. So you can download the app Masdan. It's available, right? That's via Google
Yes, it's
Play.
available.
Yeah, and you may report any environmental issues that you could see in your community and just send it via that app, Masdan.
Yes.
All right. And bago tayo magpatuloy, Miss Ella, we will pause for a very short break.
Do you have any questions about COVID-19 vaccine boosters? What exactly is a booster shot? And how does it work? What happens to your immune system when you get a booster, and will COVID boosters stay on the list? Yan ang mga katanungan na ating sasagutin sa susunod na Sabado, alas 10 ng umaga. Para sa pagpapatuloy ng ating talakayan dito lang sa Radyo Bantay Agham, Makabagong Pamamaraan sa Pagsulong ng Agham. Radyo Bantay Agham, Makabagong Pamamaraan sa Pagsulong ng Agham. Hatid sa inyo ng Cafe Maria, Kapeng Barako, ibang tapang at kaya kang ipaglaban. At nagbabalik ang Radyo Bantay Agham, Makabagong Pamamaraan sa Pagsulong ng Agham. Muli, magandang umaga mga kabantay agham. Ako si Mira Bringas and we will continue on the discussion about how science can be communicated in a lighter context para mas madali nating maunawaan, especially sa pagtalakay ng mga science-related issues ng bansa. At kasama ko pa rin ngayon sa makabulahang talakayan na to si Ms. Ella Tino from DOST Fisher.
So, Ms. Ella, how should we communicate science without compromising its scientific ideas?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think a lot of science communicators um, can attest to this. Consultations. Consultations are very important. So, working collaboratively with scientists helps enrich our material. Engaging in conversations really do make a difference. It's not enough that you know how to do a poster or do a communication plan without you know um, verifying whether what you're communicating is correct or not. It's important that we have our materials checked before we release them because we are not the experts. There are other experts. So sometimes we face challenges when it comes to paraphrasing long scientific sentences. Uh, Sometimes we compromise the real meaning behind those sentences. So we should still have them checked by our scientists, our peers, so
Mhm.
that we wouldn't you know spread fake news. Like I said, that's one of the problems. So yeah, so collaboration is very important.
So basically, it's a collaborative work to ensure delivery of facts.
They need to fact check the materials before you release them.
By the way, Miss Ella, I'm reading right now some of the questions from our listeners.
Mm.
And I got one comment slash question from our Facebook page. Sabi dito ni Daniela Cruz, Miss Ella, kailangan ba magaling sa arts or marunong sa arts and design ang isang science communicator?
Hi Daniela. So actually, well, in my background, we learned about principles of design. We learned about photography. We learned the practical uh, knowledge about those things. But um, you know what? I think it is an advantage, but it's not necessarily the main criteria for you to be a science communicator. To be a science communicator, you really have to have empathy to your audience. You know how to place yourself in their shoes. But good design, good design skills is very helpful. But I don't think that's the most important thing in science communication.
Yes, and maybe I can add that everything can be learned. And napakarami
Yeah.
din nating mga apps na ginagamit ngayon. Miss Ella, would you want to share the apps or the applications that you use?
For me, I use a lot of Photoshop, but I recently I found Canva very helpful when it comes to designing stuff because it's very easy to use and a lot of its features are free. So
Yes. So
yeah,
it just means that you don't need to be like the best artist and designer. You just need to know the
yes,
basics.
yes.
Before we end our program, any encouraging words sa ating mga listeners? Like sa mga science major students natin na nakikinig dyan, we also have our scientists and aspiring science communicators. What would be
So
your
okay.
encouraging words for them?
I think this goes to both science communicators and scientists. You have to love learning. In science, there's always something new. In communication, there's also always something new. So we have seen how communication has evolved during the pandemic, from print to and face-to-face gatherings, we resorted to digital communications. So a lot has changed since 2020. And when it comes to science, we have seen new vaccines, you know, um, come up from different countries. So these are just some of the ways how science and communication has evolved throughout the years, and is that's just 2 years. Actually, my example is just for 2 years. So you have to love learning everything, because everything in science and communication is always changing. So when you combine those two things, you also have to think that science communication has to change at some point. So if you're not flexible, if you don't have love for knowledge, you really won't survive. But if you just continue to be curious, um you just continue to question the things around you, you will thrive in science communication. As for scientists, please learn science, how to communicate your researches to your audiences, because my experience working with scientists, they hold a lot of knowledge that we can use in our everyday lives. And if they are left, in the dark, not communicated, they will be useless. But if scientists are able to communicate this knowledge to the public, life would be easier, and we have better environments to live in. And as for science communicators, um don't be intimidated. I think that's a challenge that I also face myself. Don't be intimidated by scientists, because they're also people. And actually, they would also love to learn from you. So yeah, it's really all about loving learning. So yeah, that's it. I hope you were encouraged by that.
Well, I'm sure, Miss Ella, our listeners got encouraged and learned a lot from your message. Indeed, science not communicated is science not done. And I actually like how you emphasize the importance of science being communicated. That when science is communicated, it can make our lives easier, and the great impact of science on humanity can be experienced and shared. And of course, I also like how you highlighted the role of science communicators. Well, for me, they definitely put a balance between science and its social relevance. Muli, maraming salamat, Miss Ella, for gracing Radyo Bantay Agham as our first guest. Even I learned a lot from you, from your stories and experiences as a science communicator and as a visual communication specialist sa DOST. And now I understand that the complexity of science can actually be simplified. And I'm sure our listeners got a lot too from this pilot episode.
Thank you for inviting me then, Miss Mira.
Muli, maraming salamat, Miss Ella Tino, for gracing the pilot episode of this radio program. At sa susunod na Sabado, sama-sama ulit tayo mga kaagham from 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Ako si Mira Bingas para sa Radyo Bantay Agham. Do you have any questions about COVID-19 vaccine boosters? What exactly is a booster shot? And how does it work? What happens to your immune system when you get a booster, and will COVID boosters stay on the list? Yan ang mga katanungan na ating sasagutin sa susunod na Sabado, alas 10 ng umaga. Para sa pagpapatuloy ng ating talakayan dito lang sa Radyo Bantay Agham, makabagong pamamaraan sa pagsulong ng agham. Oras ngayon, alas 10:30 ng umaga.